Tired of big tech clashing with your Catholic values? Fide Chat is now live on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. It's private, encrypted, and built by Catholics for Catholics, with features like parental controls and more. Connect securely with family, friends, and groups. Download Fide Chat at fide.email. Technology without compromise.
It is December 26th, the day after Christmas, and I hope your Christmas day was a truly holy and family-centered time. And actually, it's just a reminder, we are in the octave of Christmas and in Christmastide, so the celebrations don't stop. They may dial down as the season progresses towards Candlemas in February, but the actual joy of the season shouldn't stop. But unfortunately, neither does the news. And if I try to think of joyful people and joyful movements in the secular culture, obviously feminists come to mind first. They are the pinnacle of joy. You look up joy in the dictionary, we'll see also feminism. And so when an archbishop decided to suggest that the model for women today was the Blessed Virgin Mary, a Catholic statement that has been said since time immemorial, you can imagine how these joy-filled people responded. So let's go here, start with LifeSite. They actually posted about this, which was remarkable because their website has not had much. We are in the slowest news time of the year, by the way. In case you're wondering why all the prophecy videos and things on my channel, we're at the slowest news time of the year. Usually it is. But the headline from LifeSite is, Italian Archbishop's remarks on Mary's obedience spark backlash from feminists. Mary is truly free because she knows how to obey. Mary is the freest woman in the world because she knows how to obey, Archbishop Giuseppe Laterza said. Yet you can imagine how badly this went over with the Empower the Ladies crowd. They weren't happy about this, to put it mildly. That ideology is just part of the umbrella of Marx-inspired ideologies that are not really compatible with Catholicism. The Catholic faith is an answer to every social question, and it is the correct answer. And this is hard on our modern ears since we believe in equality as opposed to what the church says, which is complementarity. There may be a sound political reason for arguing for political equality. There might be an issue of prudence, but this modern ideology isn't really focused on that today anyway. It's focused on supremacism. The desire of the ladies to vote from 100 years ago and 150 years ago isn't exactly the same ideology driving the movements by the same name today. They have different goals. The movements of that time were actually fairly anti-Moloch, for example. Not so much today. Here are the details. An Italian archbishop's homily praising Mary's obedience to God triggered criticism on social media and reactions from feminists after a video of the sermon circulated online. On December 20th, during the fifth day of the Christmas novena at the Cathedral of Conversano, Archbishop Giuseppe Laterza stated in a homily that the Virgin Mary was, quote, the freest person in the world because she knew how to obey God. The remarks were recorded and live-streamed on social media and later shared by a local news outlet, prompting criticism from feminists who described the statements as patriarchal. Mary is truly free because she knows how to obey. Mary is the freest woman in the world because she knew how to obey, Laterza said during his homily in Conversano. We should say that to certain feminists. Nice. Among the most widely cited responses was that of Lorenzo Gasparini, an Italian feminist philosopher. Interviewed by the daily newspaper La Stampa, she strongly criticized the archbishop's words. Since for a long time, the hierarchy of ecclesiastical power has been challenged at its dogmatic foundations, this hierarchy defends itself as it can, Gasparini said, even by saying nonsense, as in this case. Fortunately, many Catholics are far ahead of these ignorant and fearful prelates. In other words, the Catholic Church's claims about God are being challenged by the culture. And so now the church is lashing out. And many Catholics don't believe what the bishops are selling anymore. Well, that's true, but many Catholics don't believe what the bishops are selling because they actually tend to agree more with Gasparini than they do with the magisterium on so many issues. But the ones who are in alignment with her side of things, they're at some point they have rejected enough of the church's moral teaching that they rejected the faith itself. Not sure where the line is on some things, but this Gasparini person is obviously not going to be a moral paragon. He goes on to say that she described the homily in Conversano as the manifestation of the political fear campaign that has struck the Catholic hierarchy for years, which has been challenged by decades of studies and experiences. So, studies, their magisterium, the secular magisterium, are university college studies. That is the secular magisterium. And experiences, well, that should sound familiar. We see modernists in the hierarchy doing this too. Your lived experience is more important than dogma and doctrine. According to Gasparini, this attitude led the church to invent so-called gender theory and to begin systematically attacking feminism, issues that, until Ratzinger, were not even remotely on the agenda. So I don't know where she attacks Pope Benedict XVI, who has been gone now for 4 years. Gasparini concluded his remarks by publicly insulting the Apostolic Nuncio. He would have access to in-depth studies that have existed for decades, but one has to wonder whether someone who rambles on about Mary's obedience like any Catholic fundamentalist influencer is even capable of understanding them. Let him drown in the ridicule of his ignorance. End quote. So let's publicly congratulate this bishop for offending all the right people. Now, that's not the only report on this out there. Maybe we should go to one a little more friendly to the feminist position. Now, they also asked somebody who was not that feminist, but somebody else what they thought. But they published a piece at thetimes.com under the headline, "Obedient Virgin Mary is a lesson to feminists," says Archbishop. He has outraged women's rights activists by preaching that Mary is truly free because she knows how to obey. And they recap what he said here. We don't need to rehash all that. Oh, did I lose my bookmark? But there it is. Then they asked this other feminist this, quote, "When the comment was picked up by a local news website, OG Conversano, it generated a torrent of criticism. Anna Maria Candela, a local journalist, another part of the secular magisterium, wrote on the website that La Terza presented an outdated view of women. The figure of the woman as subaltern, almost incapable of self-determination. That failed to take account of the changes introduced at the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. And I would counter that by saying that the Blessed Virgin Mary made the ultimate act of self-determination, which she gave her fiat. Let's continue. She said his view was a far cry from the Council's message of modernity and welcome, which would help to draw in more faithful." I'm going to try to say the rest of this without laughing. "Many more girls and boys, and not just the feminists, who in his mind evidently are comparable to modern witches to be subjected to the Holy Inquisition. Their answer," she added, "was hands off Mary and the courage of a woman without whom there would be no Christmas." So, let's go over this historical fiction here. First, the Holy Inquisition was not going after witches like she is talking about here. There were some, but that was mostly a Protestant thing. All the stereotypes about that. But this is an interesting bit of historical fiction. She said that the Second Vatican Council, with its message of modernity and welcome, has helped to draw in more faithful, many more girls and boys from all walks of life. That is simply not true. Conversions are catastrophically down. We know this. Vocations are catastrophically down. The use of the sacraments for baptizing children and holy matrimony, catastrophically down. So I don't know which world she's in, but parishes are much more empty than they were 60 years ago. But then they ask another one. Thea Dubois, a women's rights activist in Puglia, was also indignant. She said Mary was still being used to tell women how to live and what to do with their bodies. Mary exposes herself without guarantees. She doesn't submit. She is the female courage that even today marks the difficulties of so many women in their self-determination, she said. Do whatever he tells you. Do whatever he tells you. The ultimate statement of submission. La Terza said that by reading the entire homily, it was clear that he was talking about Christian freedom, which came out only out of relationship with God. If someone was offended, I humbly apologize. It wasn't my intention to assault the role of women, still less their freedom, the Archbishop said. Every day I work in Africa to give dignity to the role of women on that continent, starting with the education of young girls. End quote. Notice they left that at the end. And that was, unfortunately, a mistake by the Archbishop. He should never have apologized. Don't apologize to these people when they do this. When they are acting offended because a Christian prelate says something Christian, you do not apologize to them. The most recent iteration of the culture war in the U.S. has shown that you do not apologize to the offended God. Or to the offended mob, rather. You just don't do it. You reserve your apologies for those in your life and for God. You do not do so to the secular activists in their religion. As Hooped Crusader says in the live chat, never back down, double down, which is what he should have done. Unfortunately, he is a prelate in the church today, and they are on the ropes always because of the McCarrick problems and because of people just leaving the faith. Trish says, never back down, never apologize. That is exact. I'm curious what you think about this. This is, I thought, a funny, just one of the funniest stories I saw in the last 24 hours, just because of the, you have a bunch of memes going around right now, Protestants saying Christmas Eve and Christmas are not about Mary. Well, they sort of are, of course, secondarily to our Lord and the role the Nativity plays in the Passion and the rest. Mary's story is there too. And it is a lesson for everybody, not just women, about obedience to the will of God and trusting in the will of God, as opposed to the will of the university magisterium and the journalistic magisterium. Speaking of magisterium, though, Pope Leo XIV gave a Christmas address to the Curia, and it was very Pope Francis. Very, 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 very Pope Francis. Not only did he invoke his predecessor, whom he has made sure that unequivocally, without hesitation, he loves and wants to keep emulating. He's actually now doing his level best to sound like Pope Francis at every turn that he can take. Go to Gloria TV. With this wonderful story just in time for Christmas, where they give us the headline, Pope of Universal Fraternity warns of rigidity in faith, liturgy, and morals. That is right out of the Bergoglian Handbook. For those who had any doubts, I've been saying this a lot lately, he is much more on the same page with Pope Francis, just with a better expression. He has said outrageous things, but because he has a much better personal disposition and personality, better way of communicating, it's less obvious. On the other hand, though, and I'll talk about this in the coming days, he is nowhere near as good at handling the press as Pope Francis was. And I know that statement will shock some people. Pope Francis, well, he gave kind of off-the-cuff remarks to reporters. It was always in a kind of a quasi-controlled environment. Pope Leo's not doing that. And it's getting bad already. But here's what he has to say. He says, in his Christmas address to the Roman Curia today, on the 22nd, Pope Leo XIV praised his, quote, beloved predecessor, Pope Francis, quote, his prophetic voice, his pastoral style, and his rich magisterium have marked the Church's journey in recent years. Francis encouraged us, quote, to place God's mercy at the center, give renewed emphasis to evangelization, and be a joyful church that welcomes all and is attentive to the poorest. Furthermore, Leo XIV warned that in the church there are, quote, forces of division that may be at play. Quoting him directly, we can fall into the temptation of swinging between two opposite extremes, uniformity that fails to value differences, or, on the other hand, the exacerbation of different viewpoints instead of seeking communion. Leo XIV wants to, quote, build the communion of Christ in a synodal church, and, quote, when dealing with faith, liturgy, morality, or other matters, one risks falling victim to rigidity or ideology. He does not see his role as a gardener, quote, who tends to his own plot, but as someone, quote, who is called by Christ to be a leaven of universal fraternity among different peoples, religions, and cultures. On Vatican II, Leo XIV believes that it, quote, fixed its gaze on Christ strengthening the church and propelled her toward the world. Meet the new boss, same as the old, with a better tailor. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we are. And Pope Leo will be Pope for the next 10 years, probably, maybe longer than that. Unless, of course, some rather horrible things happen in the world. Maybe, some people keeping an eye on the calendar and the Fatima message and thinking maybe, we're heading towards an overt fulfillment of things. None of us knows for sure, but there are some speculating that. I tend to think the idea that Leo will be on the throne of Peter for as long as everybody expects, I think, is unlikely. But we will see. Harmony in the chat said, yes, Leo sounded like Bergoglio, but he's always better dressed and hasn't walked the church and pushed experimental solutions, we'll say. You were correct, but also wasn't the only bad thing Francis did. The call to universal fraternity and synodality and the rest are part and parcel of the problems in the church. They reflect the new ecclesiology that they've been pushing, that buries Catholic theology and replaces it with a universal, nonsensical journey together salvation that isn't salvation for anything but the world as opposed to souls. I'm very curious what people think about this. Harmony Gold basically says in the chat that we should continue to pray for Leo, that she wasn't praying enough for Francis, and that we shouldn't make that same mistake. You should pray for Leo every single day. Pray for him. His soul's on the line, as are ours. But I'm curious, are you surprised by this statement by Leo at all? I'm not. We've been following what he has been doing as Pope for the last now 7 months. None of this will surprise anybody. He has gone out of his way since day one on that loggia to praise Pope Francis as much as possible, and not just the way you would expect a Pope to praise his predecessor, but then to continue his work, and not just in the way that you would expect a Pope to do so in praise of his predecessor, but really doubling down on a lot of things. Now the rhetoric. So just pray for him and pray that the scales may fall from his eyes. We are in a time where the church is desperately needed to actually act like the Catholic Church once again on the world stage, and we're not getting that. People need to be asking themselves, why is that? Is it the bishops are afraid, or there's something else going on? Well, let me know what you thought of this in the comments, please. And like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps too. Please pray for everybody we spoke about today. Bishops good and bad. Prelates who have surrendered their sense to the secular world and all the rest of it. And please pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.